Welcome back to the deep dive. This time we're going through some Judy Justice cases that you sent our way. Seems like you're really interested in cases that have family drama, financial disputes, and Judge Judy just laying down their law.
It seems there's a lot of interest in how personal relationships can get all mixed up with money. Those like blurred lines?
Yeah, and nobody cuts through that mess better than Judge Judy, right? We've got like 4 cases here to get into, and each one shows us a different kind of blurred line. First, we've got some exes fighting about money. Then it's a rental car gone wrong, which makes you think about who's really responsible, right? Then there's this crazy roommate situation. I mean, it's got a stolen girlfriend, missing cats, like the whole 9 yards. And to wrap it all up, we've got grandparents, a son-in-law, and a whole bunch of unpaid debts, including, get this, a boat.
What's really interesting is how each case, even though they're all so different, can teach us something about how to deal with similar situations in our own lives.
Okay, so let's just jump right into that first case. Desiree Surratt and Curtis Vasquez, 2 exes with a history of not seeing eye to eye.
Oh, yeah. Their case is a perfect example of what happens when family and finances get all tangled up.
Desiree is suing Curtis for all sorts of expenses. She says he owes her for their 2 kids, but Curtis, he's countersuing. So apparently there's this big back and forth about whether Curtis agreed to pay for half of their kids' sports. He claims it never happened, but Desiree insists there was, like a verbal agreement.
And that's where things can get really tricky. I mean, sure, verbal agreements can sometimes hold up in court, but it's really hard to prove them, especially without, like anything written down.
Exactly. And to make things even more complicated, Desiree, she can't even really remember what was said during that conversation about the sports. Then we've got this whole saga involving a car that Desiree claims Curtis sold without asking her.
Yeah, it looks like Curtis sold the car to his father for $700, but then he claims it broke down and he had to give the money back. And you guessed it, no clear proof either way, which just makes everything worse.
It's like a he said, she said situation, but with a broken down car thrown into the mix. But here's where things get really good. Big Curtis, that's the dad, he jumps in and kind of stirs the pot with some text messages.
Oh, yeah. Those text messages, they show that Curtis and his dad, they don't exactly have the best relationship. And Big Curtis even tells Desiree that he can't get his own son to pay him back for things. It's interesting because it shows how personal feelings can really affect what people think is fair.
Totally. Like, Big Curtis is practically siding with Desiree against his own son. You can't help but wonder what's going on behind the scenes there.
It's a good reminder that family relationships, well, they can get pretty messy. And all that baggage can really complicate these financial disputes.
So what's the takeaway here? Like, if you're ever thinking about relying on a verbal agreement, especially with family,
Write it down. Even just a quick text message to confirm what you talked about can make a world of difference if things go south later on.
good advice. But what about when you're dealing with an ex who, isn't exactly the best communicator?
That's when sticking to written communication can really help. Like emails or text messages, they leave a clear record of all your attempts to work things out, which can be super helpful if you end up in court.
Smart. Now back to Desiree and Curtis. She's also asking to be paid back for her daughter's cell phone bill, which, get this, Curtis had been paying for 7 years.
That's a great example of how financial boundaries can get blurred, even with the best intentions. Curtis was being generous covering the bill for that long, but without a formal agreement, it's really unclear who's actually responsible. It's a good reminder to be upfront and set those boundaries, even in casual situations.
Okay, so after all that, who did Judge Judy side with in this financial tug of war?
Judge Judy ended up ruling in favor of Desiree. She awarded her $700 for that car, but she dismissed all of Curtis's counterclaims. She also made a point of saying that Desiree should have gone through the proper legal channels for any changes to child support.
Classic Judge Judy, always making sure everyone knows the rules. But what's the big takeaway here for anyone listening?
It's really important to go through the proper channels when you have a legal issue. Judy Justice might be quick and entertaining, but real-life legal stuff, it's a lot more formal.
Okay, on to our second case. This one takes us into the world of car rentals gone wrong. We've got Selena Brown and Treyon Dupree, 2 military veterans who are also business partner. They're suing Brianna Freeman for damages to their, get this, Mercedes rental car.
This case is interesting. It really gets you thinking about who's responsible when things go wrong. Personal responsibility versus what you agreed to in a contract.
So Selena and Treyon are suing Brianna because, well, her boyfriend got into an accident while he was driving the rental.
But here's the thing, Brianna. She signed the rental agreement. And that means she's responsible for any damages, even if the accident wasn't her fault.
Oh, that makes sense. When you sign a contract, you're agreeing to stick to the rules, even if things go wrong.
Exactly. But this case also shows how important it is to understand your insurance. Brianna's insurance company, they denied her claim at first because she wasn't totally honest about how the accident happened.
So we've got some drama mixed in with the legal stuff. That never ends well.
Nope. It seems Brianna wasn't completely upfront about things, and the insurance company thought she might be trying to pull a fast one. It's a good reminder, to be honest, especially when it comes to insurance.
Definitely. Trying to trick the system, that almost never works out, especially with legal matters.
And get this, to make matters worse, Selena and Tryon, their own insurance company, dropped them because they initially said the accident was a hit and run based on what Brianna told them.
Hold on. So everyone's caught in this web of like miscommunication and potential lies. Talk about a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, it's a great example of how a small lie can turn into a huge mess. It shows just how important it is to double-check information before you make a claim and to be honest with your business partners.
Because in the end, everyone ends up paying the price, right? Literally and figuratively.
Exactly. And when they got to court, well, Selena and Trayon's story didn't quite add up. At first, it said they lived at different addresses. But on their business paperwork, they used the same address. Then there was the whole question of whether Trayon even knew about the accident and the damage to the car.
Sounds like their credibility might have taken a bit of a hit with all those inconsistencies.
Right. If you want to win your case, you have to be consistent and show a united front.
So after all that back and forth, what happened in Judge Judy's courtroom? How did this car rental saga end?
Okay, so despite those inconsistencies, Judge Judy actually ruled in their favor. She awards them $8,800 for the damage to the Mercedes. Her point was that Brianna signed that contract, so she was obligated to fix the car regardless of who caused the accident.
That's a pretty clear ruling, based right on the contract. But this whole case, I bet there are some good lessons here for anyone thinking about starting a business, especially one that involves rentals.
Absolutely. This case really highlights the importance of understanding contracts and liability. It also shows why you need good insurance and why you need to be honest and transparent in all your business dealings.
Some really good advice, especially if you're dealing with car rentals or anything where contracts and liability are a big deal.
Exactly. Starting a business, it can be really exciting, but it's super important to do your research and be prepared for the challenges that might come up.
All right, before we move on to the next case, let's take a second to think about what we've seen so far. Two cases, both different, but with a common thread. What would you say it is?
Both of these cases really stress the importance of clear communication, putting things in writing, and understanding your legal and financial obligations. A lot of these problems could have been avoided if things were more transparent and they had a better handle on the agreements they were making.
Makes sense. Whether you're dealing with exes, business partners, or even family, clear communication and documentation can save you a whole lot of trouble in the long run.
No doubt. And in our next case, we'll see how things can get even more complicated when emotions and personal relationships collide with money problems.
All right, get ready for case number 3. This one's a real doozy. We've got a love triangle, a stolen girlfriend, missing cats, and a whole lot of blurred lines.
This situation is the perfect example of what can go wrong with informal living arrangements and why setting clear boundaries is so important, even with people you think you can trust.
Okay, so we've got Kamar Jalil suing his ex-girlfriend, Katie Calderon, and he's also suing her new boyfriend, Amante Nepomuceno, for unpaid rent, which is one thing, but then he also wants his 2 cats back.
Amante moved in with Kamar and Katie, and they agreed he'd pay a third of the rent, but there was nothing in writing. No contract.
So we're back to the whole issue of verbal agreements and how things can fall apart.
It's something we see a lot of these kinds of disputes. Without a written contract, enforcing an agreement, especially when relationships change, becomes a real headache.
Yeah, and in this case, that relationship definitely changed. Amante stopped paying rent, and then he ended up with Kamar's girlfriend.
Yeah, that romantic drama definitely adds a whole new level of, well, messiness to this financial dispute.
And then you've got the cats. Kamar says the cats are his and that Katie and Amante took them when they move out. But here's the twist. The vet records, they have Katie listed as the owner.
This is why it's so important to be clear about who owns what, even when it comes to pets. Without clear documentation, proving ownership can be really tough. And those emotional attachments, well, they can make everything even harder.
This case is like a tangled ball of yarn. Can't wait to hear how Judge Judy handled this one.
Well, before we get to her ruling, it's worth mentioning that Kamar tried to claim more than just the unpaid rent. He wanted $5,000 to cover expenses for the cats and Katie's dogs.
Whoa, that's throwing some serious gasoline on the fire. I bet Judge Judy wasn't too impressed with that.
You're right. She's really good at spotting when people try to exaggerate their claims, and this was no exception.
So what was the verdict in this cat-filled drama?
Judge Judy ruled in Amante's favor. He had to pay $1,854 to Kamar for 2 months of unpaid rent, but she dismissed all of Kamar's claims for the cats. Based on those vet records, they belonged to Katie. And she also shut down his claim for the cats and dogs' expenses, even suggesting he adopt 2 more cats if he wanted them that badly.
That's Judge Judy. Straight to the point. But what's the takeaway here? What should our listeners keep in mind?
This case really shows why written agreements are so important, even if you're just living with someone casually. And it highlights why you need to document who owns a pet, especially when you're sharing a place.
Some great advice. It's also a good reminder that while Judge Judy might give us some entertaining solutions, in real life, you need to be more strategic and understand the law.
Absolutely. If you're ever in a situation like this, it's always best to talk to a lawyer so you know what your options are and how to protect yourself. Welcome back. We've already gone through 3 Judy Justice cases, and we've seen all the ways personal relationships and finances can get messy.
It's amazing how much drama and legal stuff they squeeze into those short cases. It's like a soap opera with a law degree.
Yeah, it really is. And in our last case for today, we'll see a lot of those same themes: family, money, communication breakdowns, and why it's so important to handle things the right way.
All right, let's jump back into Judge Judy's courtroom and see what we can learn. This time, it's a former couple, Scott Manis and Heather Palin, and they're back in court fighting about, wait for it, a broken vacuum cleaner.
Ah, yes, the vacuum cleaner case. But even though it might seem silly, there's a lot more going on beneath the surface. It shows how much tension there still is between these two.
It's like they can't even agree on how to get rid of a broken vacuum.
You got it. This vacuum cleaner is just a symbol of their bigger problems. It's about figuring out how to be parents together, even after the divorce.
So it's not just about the vacuum, it's about the whole co-parenting thing and all the challenges that come with it.
Right. And this case also gets into some serious legal stuff: defamation.
Ooh, defamation. That's big time. Tell me more.
Well, Scott says Heather filed a false report with Child Protective Services, and he's countersuing her for defamation.
Whoa. This just went from 0 to 60. This isn't just about a broken vacuum anymore.
Nope, not at all. It brings up big questions about responsibility as a parent and what happens when you make false accusations.
So what's the deal with these CPS reports? Was Heather actually lying about Scott?
Scott says CPS contacted him 2 times, once in 2019 and again in 2020. Someone made anonymous reports saying his daughter Tricia wasn't safe. Heather denies making the reports, but she admits to telling CPS that she was worried about Scott having Tricia sleep in his bed.
Uh-oh. That sounds kind of like a little suspicious.
Yeah, and Judge Judy, she was not happy about this. She thought it was really inappropriate for Scott to have his daughter sleep in his bed, especially with all the conflict going on between him and Heather.
Yeah, I get why Judge Judy was concerned. It's definitely a situation that could be taken the wrong way.
Exactly. It shows how important it is for parents to be careful, especially when they're going through a divorce.
It's like a reminder that being a parent means putting your kid first no matter what, and to avoid doing anything that could put them at risk or make things worse between you and your ex.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And this case also shows how tricky defamation cases can be.
Let's talk about that. I mean, some of us aren't lawyers, so break it down. What does defamation mean and why is it such a big deal?
Basically, defamation is when you say something false about someone that hurts their reputation. And to prove it, you have to show a few things. 1, that what was said was actually false. 2, that it was said to someone else. And 3, that it actually damaged the person's reputation.
So it's not just about hurt feelings, it's about actually hurting someone's standing in the community.
Exactly. And in this case, Scott says that what Heather told CPS hurt his reputation and caused him emotional distress.
Right, that makes sense. But what did Judge Judy say about this defamation claim?
Judge Judy ended up dismissing Scott's claim for defamation. She said she couldn't be sure who made those reports to CPS, but she did tell both parents they needed to behave better and put their daughter first.
Sounds like a typical Judge Judy ruling, fair but firm, with a little dose of common sense and a reminder to put the kid first.
That's her for sure. And even though the case is about defamation, it also has some important lessons for anyone who's co-parenting after a divorce.
Okay, tell me, what can we learn from Scott and Heather's vacuum cleaner drama?
The big lesson: communication is key. Even when a relationship ends, co-parents need to be clear about how they'll talk to each other, how they'll make decisions, even small stuff like borrowing things.
It's like having a co-parenting playbook to avoid arguments and confusion.
Exactly. And it's also super important not to make false accusations or involve people like CPS unless there's a real danger to a child.
Because those accusations can have serious consequences for everyone, not just the person you're accusing.
That's right. It's crucial to put the child first and get professional help if you're struggling with co-parenting or if there are real safety concerns.
Great advice. This case shows that co-parenting takes maturity, communication, and being willing to put your differences aside for your kids.
Absolutely. And that wraps up our look at these 4 Judy Justice cases.
Wow, that was quite a ride. We've seen it all today. Broken vacuum cleaners, co-signed loans, stolen girlfriends, even missing cats. I'm worn out just thinking about it.
It's definitely been interesting to see how personal relationships, money, and the legal system can get so complicated.
But beyond the entertainment, I think there are some really important things we can all learn from these cases.
You're absolutely right. Let's go over those key takeaways and give our listeners some practical advice.
Sounds good to me. Let's do it. All right, so after going through all these cases, what are the big takeaways? What have we learned from all this drama?
I think the biggest lesson here is to be clear about what you're agreeing to and put things in writing. It's so easy for things to get misconstrued and turn into huge fights, especially when you mix money and personal relationships.
Yeah, it's like Judge Judy always says, get it in writing. Just a quick text or email confirming an agreement, that can save you so much trouble down the road.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting yourself. Clear communication, it helps call trust and produce resentment.
So whether you're sharing an apartment, lending money to a friend, or even just borrowing something from your ex, make sure you're both on the same page and get it in writing.
Definitely. And another important thing we saw is that you need to know your rights and what you're responsible for. Not knowing the law, that's no excuse, and it can really cost you.
Yeah, some of these people really got themselves into trouble by acting without thinking or just relying on those casual agreements. It's a good reminder to get legal advice when you need it and to do things the right way.
Exactly. Don't try to be your own judge and jury. There are rules and procedures for a reason, and trying to cut corners can backfire big time.
Right. Think about Herman and that threatening letter. That didn't exactly work out for him.
That's the perfect example. Trying to solve a dispute by using threats or going outside the legal system, that can make things worse and get you in even more trouble.
So if you have a legal issue, the smartest thing to do is talk to a lawyer and figure out what your options are. They can guide you through the process, protect your rights, and hopefully help you find a fair solution.
Absolutely. But beyond the legal and financial stuff, I think these cases also teach us about the importance of being mature and understanding other people's feelings, especially when family's involved.
It's like Judge Judy always says, family comes first. But sometimes it's hard to keep your emotions out of things when money's on the line.
No doubt. We saw how past conflicts and emotional baggage can turn even the simplest financial dispute into a huge mess.
Like with the Snoys and their former son-in-law, all those unspoken expectations and resentment, that just made everything so much worse.
It's a good reminder that communication, forgiveness, and compromise, those are all crucial to having healthy family relationships, especially when you're dealing with money.
All right, so to wrap things up, let's give our listeners some solid advice. If they're dealing with a financial dispute or struggling with family relationships, what are the top 3 things they should keep in mind?
Okay, number 1, communicate clearly and write everything down. Don't just rely on what was said or what you think you heard. Get it in writing, even if it's just a quick text to confirm.
Great advice. What's number 2?
Know your legal rights and what you're responsible for. Do your homework, get legal advice if you need it, and follow the proper procedures. Don't try to take shortcuts or act impulsively.
Makes sense. And for the final piece of advice?
Put relationships first and try to find common ground. Money comes and goes, but relationships are valuable. Be willing to listen, compromise, and forgive, especially with family.
That's some wise advice. Sometimes letting go of a financial dispute is the best way to save a relationship.
Absolutely. Holding on to anger and resentment, that can cost you more than money in the long run.
Well said. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Judy justice. We hope you learned something and maybe got some ideas for handling your own relationships and finances.
Remember, life can be complicated, but with clear communication, knowing your rights, and focusing on healthy relationships, you can avoid ending up in Judge Judy's courtroom.
And that's something we can all agree on. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and always, always get it in writing.